Welcome back to another episode of Homer Bound, a podcast where a couple of big old nerds read through and discuss Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. I am Llama.
And I am, continue to be, and always have been, Wriste.
Not the artist formerly known as Wriste.
The artist currently known as Wriste.
The artist currently known as Wriste. Beautiful. Yeah, we're back, and things are getting exciting on this episode too. This is I think or at least book 20, so we'll be going through books 19 and 20 today. Book 20 is you're really getting into the tension of the build-up in going into the massacre of suitors that's about to happen.
I suppose so. Honestly, the massacre of the suitors is such a sure thing and a well understood thing that is going to happen because it's been just prophesied left and right. Honestly, book 19 for me is sort of the big encounter that I really relish when I read. I could honestly, if you were to make a TV show out of the Odyssey, I feel like actually it would probably be best to have it all set in these last books and sort of have some recap added in, because I love watching Odysseus and Telemachus and Athena, and in book 19 we have Odysseus and Penelope and Odysseus and Eurycleia, and everyone getting on the same page sort of a little bit. I like that stuff a little bit more. Obviously,
so I do think that you're right in the sense that I actually really love book 19 for the kind of interactions that we get between Odysseus and Penelope and Eurycleia, who I will be calling Nanny because I just love calling her Nanny. But I think for me, the actual buildup of the tension happens a lot more in book 20 for me.
There's more catharsis going on with the suitors, but the situation with the suitors is less complicated, I think.
It's less complicated, but, we know what's going to happen, but they don't. And I think that's what I love about book 20 is you get this real feeling that they are starting to kind of get inklings of what might be happening and warning signs.
Honestly, what I would have liked a little, and the Odyssey does this a little bit. It does this with Amphinous, right? Amphinous, and a little teeny tiny bit with Eurybates, but I would have liked more of a look into their inner lives, and the inner lives.
I also would have liked that.
Yeah, because that was part of what made the Iliad complicated.
I was going to say that too. I kind of have been missing a little bit of that from the Iliad, where you get these really rich backstories on all of those people. Even relatively insignificant people in the Iliad tend to get these rich and detailed backstories,
and not even just
all the time,
and not even just the backstories. The inner lives of them. I would have liked a book where we see Amphinous navigate the other suitors and maybe engage with Penelope once or twice or something like that, or in her vicinity. By the way,
it is Amphinous.
Amphinous. Yeah.
I think you're portmanteauing Antinous and Amphinous because they are incredibly similar names when it comes down to it.
Yeah, I would have liked some of that a little bit more to make the again. We're obviously meant to want what Odysseus is going to get for him, and we know that he's going to get it. And there was the same sort of, it wasn't as much of a protagonist-antagonist relationship sort of thing with the Iliad, because even though the outcome is long foregone, and we kind of know what's going to happen, as I said, it becomes complicated because we know their situation, we are given insight into their politics, and the people, like Hector, and Priam, and even Paris a little bit, and Helen, and even a bunch of other captains, and it made it what to me anyway feels more rewarding to dig into. But with the Odyssey, the prime conflict as I said before, is less complicated. But I really like the what was significantly more complicated is Odysseus's relationship with the people who were not as sure about. I get like we don't know as much about them, like Penelope.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Although this, honestly, this will, as mentioned in the Iliad, we have analysis and then we have synthesis. I'm trying to figure out how do I synthesize all of the stuff that we've read so far. How do I bring it all together in a way that I can package that will allow me to look at the Odyssey not just in its pieces but as a whole. And I'm starting to get there, and I'm hoping, and this sort of distance from the characters that we've been mentioning, every character to Odysseus less so, but pretty much every other character has been like a black box, and hopefully that'll play into how I eventually come to understand the Odyssey, at least until my next read through.
Yeah, for sure. So before we truly get into things, I will issue our usual little content warning. We are immature adults. We like naughty words. We say naughty words. Wriste is dabbing on camera right now
you have no proof
to
of that.
try and throw me off. I may have no proof of that, but I feel like out of the two of us, I'm the more believable person. So, just saying.
I mean, Odysseus sure seemed convincing. People would say he's most believable. Maybe you're
okay.
Maybe you're like Odysseus. Maybe you have the tale telling touch.
Could be. Who knows? But yeah, you did in fact just dab a bunch of times on camera, much to my great confusion. I don't know what that was about. I was saying that we both say naughty words, so perhaps that was a celebration of that.
Well, you said you were very childlike and immature,
that.
So I figured.
Well, okay, that
hypothetically, anyway.
If
I were one to dab repeatedly, that would be a way of demonstrating our immaturity. But of course, as I said, we have no proof of that.
Every single person who listens to this who knows you in any capacity knows that I'm right.
Type out who you believe most in the comments. Me, the truth teller, or Llama, the liar. All right, go on.
Okay. As I said, we, him especially, are very immature adults. We use naughty words. There's graphic content in the Odyssey. There's violence. There's some hugging and kissing, most of which we've gotten past. So mostly warning you all about the violence at this point, but you never know. And so yeah, that's our little content warning. Listener, be advised. And on that note, I will give us a quick little recap here so that we can kind of place ourselves back in the environment in which we left off. So last time we went through book 17, Insults and Abuse, and book 18, Two Beggars. In Insults and Abuse, there were a lot of insults and abuse. Shocker there. These book titles, they never fail us. So Telemachus has come home from Sparta and has been greeted by Nanny, has been greeted by his mother. His mother has asked him, what happened on his trip. Has he heard any news about his father? He kind of tries to play coy with that. But of course, our new friend Theoclymenus the prophet butts in to talk about bird signs and, tells Penelope that he has already told Telemachus that Odysseus is home and ready to take his revenge. And as he says this, Odysseus has been guided up back to his own home by Eumaeus, the swineherd. And they meet Melanthius, who is kind of a little crony of the suitors. He is very rude to Odysseus, and hip checks him, but Odysseus doesn't fall. Thinks about beating him to death with his stick, but doesn't do that either. And then we have the tragic story about Argos the dog. Pour one out for Argos, everyone. Then Telemachus has a bunch of food brought to old man Odysseus because Odysseus is still in disguise. And he goes to mingle amongst the suitors who wonder who the hell he is. Antinomus continues to be a dick to him and throws a stool at Odysseus, which all of this is just continuing to piss him off and piss him off. And then Penelope asks to speak to Odysseus, and he says later, when we can be alone and without the suitors potentially interfering. And then in the book Two Beggars, we see this other beggar, Iris, also pick on old man Odysseus. They fight. Odysseus smashes his jaw in, which is gruesome.
Yeah, he said it would be a nice light tap. And
he said it would be a nice light tap.
Broke his jaw
smashes
and
his face.
There was blood everywhere.
Odysseus, takes a moment to warn Amphinomus, our, kind of maybe not so bad suitor, to kind of get out while he can and to turn and do the right thing. This advice is ignored because he is destined to die. Athena, gives Penelope the idea to go down and make herself seen to the suitors. And I still love that her servant's like, you're gonna go out there looking like that? But Athena makes her super hot. She kind of tells the suitors that the moment is at hand where she's probably gonna pick someone who she's gonna marry. And Athena goads the suitors into continuing to mess with old man Odysseus. And kind of where we leave off is that, all these suitors who have been taunting him have gone to bed. They've all brought all these gifts for Penelope, and everyone has eaten their fill and gone to bed. And this is where we find ourselves when we open up with book 19, The Queen and the Beggar.
This story certainly, more so than the Iliad, picks up almost exactly where it leaves off, all the time.
I keep thinking to myself, how much more of a kind of linear story it is.
Well, not so much linear as in, but more every book is a direct continuation of the next thing.
I feel like that is kind of the meaning of linear.
Well, linear, linear means
certain...
I wouldn't say it's linear because we're actually given a lot of timey-wimey stuff. I got confused for a moment when we were talking about Odysseus's adventures. I think I referred to Odysseus's visit to Calypso's island as happening before his visit with Circe, when in fact it was the other way around. I know that intellectually, but in the moment, the timey-wiminess kind of got to me, and so we're given a lot of time jumps and time skips, or not time jumps and time skips. Yeah, time jumps and skips within those time jumps up until a few books ago.
I don't know. I personally didn't find it that way because I don't know. It works really well for me, right? So you have this kind of storyline where you're figuring out what has been happening with Telemachus, and then you're figuring out what has been happening with Odysseus, and then Odysseus goes into his story. And I was always able to frame it really well in the sense of he is telling the story. This is the part where he's telling the story. So I think
I'm not saying it was confusing. It's just not. It's not like a linear. It's a more straightforward story.
It is. I do see it as a bit more linear, I think, than you do, because I'm able to encapsulate that portion of it as something that's being told to people in the present moment. And then the continuation of that is fairly smooth for me.
I guess so. It was smooth for me too. Although, as I did get confused in that one instance. Linear seems to suggest a pretty, I guess, direct path in terms of time.
I think I'm thinking of it maybe a little bit more abstractly, in the sense of these things follow a timeline that is a lot easier for me to follow.
Sure, yeah.
Like there's a direct timeline between all of these events, whereas like in the Iliad, I found myself being taken aback a lot by the stories of like things that happened a really long time ago being interwoven with the things that were happening presently.
I was gonna say I actually view the Iliad as more of a linear story than this one. Yeah, I guess you see that too, because they do take some asides to talk about people's backgrounds and stuff like that.
Yeah. Although like that was how it felt to me. You know, I think we both can potentially be right here, honestly.
Well, sure,
because
yeah.
I think either one of them can be interpreted a certain way. I know when I was reading the Iliad, like I would get so into what was happening then and now that those like backstories and asides would just throw me out of it completely. So I think I almost kind of had a similar experience to what you're describing with the like Circe and Calypso kind of mix up of like things are happening at different times, so it's not easy, or it's not difficult to kind of mix them up.
Yeah, and it could also be that I've just read the Iliad so many times that I as you said, I can like compartmentalize those time skips a little bit better. I know when I was working with some of the folks on the audiobook, one person, I won't name them, but they read one of the like epic similes as literally happening. I think it had to do with like it was describing the sea, but they read it as something that was actually hindering the Achaeans.
Like I definitely think that was my experience with the Iliad. Not necessarily in exactly that way, but I just feel like, and I think this is also a difference. Like, I feel like the epic similes in the Odyssey, there have been some of them, but they have not been like nearly as lengthy.
Yeah.
So they don't pull me out of the scenery as much, you know? Like they're so much easier to handle, whereas in the Iliad, there would just be paragraphs long epic similes. And I would get to the end of it and I'd be like, oh my god, you were still describing that one thing? And it would be so jarring to go back to... So I think when I'm saying linear, like, what I mean is, like, there's a much more direct path through the story.
Yeah, sure.
That I'm able to follow a lot more easily. And to me, that I think is linear.
When you say linear, I guess you mean, like, at a more granular level. Like, we're not stopping.
Like, I'm not talking about, like, literally the chronology.
Yeah,
I'm talking just about, like, the actual story itself.
Gotcha. Okay, no, we've sorted it out. We've figured it out.
Yep, indeed.
It's interesting. I do find...
Go for it.
Sometimes I do forget, and I mean, I guess I'm remembering now as I'm reading, but, like, how confused I was when I read the Odyssey for the first time at the start of this year, because there were like so many parts where like, okay, I don't know what I'm reading. I have to like stop and read it line by line and like squint and go back and double check all my sentences to make sure everything was making sense.
That was me with the Iliad. It's really interesting though, because we've talked about this, like you and I have kind of had the same experience, but with the opposite book. Which is to say, we've both read one of these books a considerable amount more than the other person has. And so, like, I think we're both having a kind of mirrored experience of, like, having a way easier time with the book that we're more familiar with. Which, I mean, obviously makes total sense.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's just kind of funny because, like, I'm not having the same confusion with the Odyssey at all. I'm just, like, breezing through it. It's so much fun to read. I love the Odyssey.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I especially can't wait to get to these later books.
Oh yeah. And so let's dive in because like at the beginning of Queen and the Beggar, Odysseus is in the hall. He's scheming once again, you know, with a theme. I think I was still saying scheming in my brain. So a schema, the goddess. Athena and he are hatching plans to kill the suitors. But, you know, it's interesting because the opening lines say this, and then he just immediately starts talking to Telemachus. He's talking to him about, like, you know, how they have to hide the weapons and what they're going to use kind of as their explanation should anyone, really take notice of this as to, like, what are they doing with all these weapons? Then, Telemachus summons Eurycleia, and tells her to basically shut all the slave girls into their room so that they can do this, so that they can, take all of these weapons. And Nanny, being the sweet old lady that she is, she's like, oh, I wish you would take charge of all the household management and guard the wealth. You're gonna be good at this.
I mean, this is a moment that they talked about earlier. It looks like they're just doing this here. I'm a little bit unsure. Do you know why he has Eurycleia shut the women into their rooms while they do this? Is this so that none of them know where the weapons are, or?
I think so. I mean, because I know that I'm trying to remember if Telemachus has been told what's going on with the slave girls who are, like, not really with it, or, that he knows about the ones that are sleeping with the suitors.
I suspect he would. I
suspect he would as well. And so I'm thinking that, like, part of it is, like, if there are slave girls around who are helping the suitors, he doesn't want them to know, so that they can't then relay that information to the suitors and that their plan can go off without a hitch. That would be my inclination to believe that.
Yeah, unless there was an explanation earlier. But that's my best guess. I don't
think there is. I think it's mostly just, like, to make sure that nobody knows about what they're doing, because it would sure suck if somebody found out where these weapons were being hidden and made their plan moot. And so, yeah, so they get to doing this, and Telemachus says, this stranger will help me out, and, he has to be the man who eats my bread must work for me, even if he has come from far away. So he's kind of just explaining this away as, like, yeah, well, he's my guest, but, he's eating my food, so I might as well put him to work. And this seems to pass muster. And then Athena, like, helps them out with this, because this is at night. This is after all the suitors have gone to bed.
Yeah.
Things are presumably quite dark.
Yeah, and Odysseus has been recently tending to the braziers in the main party hall or whatever, so he's had to keep things light. It's been dark.
It's been dark, and Athena comes along with her golden lamp and makes it light so that they can get all of this work done. And Telemachus is just like, this is really interesting. It got light all of a sudden. Looks like some god must be in the house. And Odysseus is just like, shut up. This is the way of the gods. Don't question it. Just go to bed. And then I love the wording of this, and I wonder what it is in the ancient Greek versus this translation by Emily Wilson. You need to go to bed. This is around line like 43 or 44. You need to go to bed. I will stay here to aggravate the slave girls and your mother and make her cry and let her question me. Which is just, like, hilarious.
This little exchange between Telemachus and Odysseus. For one thing, I think it very briefly and I think succinctly, I guess, contrasts how much experience they've had with the gods. Telemachus has obviously had some experience with Athena, but Odysseus has just, like, it's just a part of things, right? It's like it's like in those stories where someone discovers that they have magic, or they've been teleported to a world with magic, like, oh, magic, and then the person who's been there for a while is like, this is just normal, this is the way things are, and, like, stop freaking out about it, or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just like, oh, like, wait, just don't worry about it, it's fine, don't worry about it. This is one of those moments where Odysseus is just kind of instilling these last few things that he needs to put into Telemachus to kind of bring him the full way of coming in, like, again, not like changing him per se, but like filling in those last blank spots. Well, he's him kind of coming into manhood.
He's giving him advice. An extreme example he says, discipline your thoughts. An extreme example of what Telemachus is doing is, like, if you've hung around like a really young child, like old enough to talk and observe things, but not old enough to be, older, like you'll know that they just say whatever comes into their head. Like something will appear, or someone will be there and they'll say, "Hey, that's this person," or "I like the color red," or they'll just say what's on their mind, even if no one's listening. Obviously, Telemachus isn't quite like that, but if they're like sneaking around, moving these weapons, and something pops up, and like Odysseus sees the light too. He's seen it as Telemachus does because it's in the same area, but he doesn't say anything. But Telemachus feels the need to comment on it. Odysseus, like this need to like externalize all of these thoughts is
right. And Odysseus is just like, okay, so actually you don't need to say all of that out loud.
Yeah. That he just doesn't find it remarkable, or if he does, he doesn't say anything about it. He internalizes it as just part of the world. And yeah, we've talked about how far Telemachus has come as a person. He's gained more confidence, but he's still young. He didn't just grow up overnight. And we'll see more of this in book 20, where I think he kind of
definitely
where he kind of acts a bit. He does that. He has done and will continue to do this thing where he says, "I'm not a child anymore. I'm an adult. I'm older. I'm grown. I've changed." Even though it's only been a couple weeks at most since he was childish, and even that need to like to say those things aloud is very it speaks a little bit to how someone views themselves and how someone is. Just having to say like, "Oh, I'm a grown up now," I'm 12 years old.
I'm a big boy now. I wear big boy pants.
Exactly, and he's able to wear those pants a little bit. If anything, just like in contrast to who he was and how he carried himself at the start of the story. But he's still got a long ways to go. He doesn't have that sort of supreme confidence that Odysseus has to speak and think silently and think silently to himself, to internalize his thoughts and lie, which is what Odysseus is about to do in this book.
Yeah, well, he's about to like put on a master class in it.
Oh yeah, I do also think it's odd that I was also curious as to how the statement "I will stay here to aggravate the slave girls and your mother and make her cry and let her question me." I
just find that to be hilarious phrasing, right? Like, as if she hasn't suffered enough.
Yeah, I really am wondering how this is rendered, because it's an odd sort of thing to say. Why does he want to make her cry? What is there to be gained? Is he talking about? Is he saying that he wants to make her cry, or he intends to make her cry, or does he know that what she's going to ask him, the answers to those things that he's going to give will make her cry?
I mean, I do feel like he kind of knows that she's going to cry no matter what, because that has been the overall theme of her. Like, everyone says that she does nothing but cries. Everyone sees that she does nothing but cry. Like, she just is crying a lot.
Yeah.
It's very sad.
Yeah, well, and yet the statement that he makes feels like it is phrased in such a way that not only...
It feels really intentional.
Yeah, it's not just something that will happen incidentally. It seems like something that he aims to make happen.
He's
and I'm
scheming.
I'm curious.
with a schema. I'm bringing this fully into my vocabulary now. I mean, I hate myself for that, but I'm doing it.
I would believe you. However, in the last episode, you said that you were going to refer to Iris by his full name. Oh wait, or did you? Wait.
No, I said I was going to call him Iris.
Okay. All right. Sorry.
I said his name was Arneus,
Okay,
but
actually,
I
yeah.
said I was
No,
going
you're
to call
right.
him Iris.
My memory
Yeah.
gave it. I'm blaming my memory, not me. Okay, my memory remembered that the other way around. That you were not going to call him Iris, and you were going to call him
Sure.
whatever his real name was.
Sure.
Anyway, continue.
Very, very well.
I'll have an anathema counter going on. For those of you keeping track at home, please post the number of
a schema.
schemas that llamas.
Going off of my original blunder into something decidedly cooler.
Sure.
Whatever. Like, you haven't come up with incredibly ridiculous things that you have said on this here podcast.
No.
Definitely not. Could never be you. So so Penelope, the queen, who is going to be made to cry a considerable amount, as, you know, is her favorite pastime, comes down from her room looking like Artemis, or I guess with her wits about her, came down from her room like Artemis or Golden Aphrodite. That just, like, suggests to me this, like, just how regal and, like, godlike she looks.
It's a longer version of godlike, it seems.
Yeah. And so she comes down, and Odysseus is, I guess, still in this room doing, you know, whatever it is that he's doing. Telemachus has gone off to sleep. She, you know, comes down and sits by the fire, all of her slaves, you know, pulling up her chair and, you know, laying a big old fleece across the chair and clearing up all of the mess from the suitors that has been, you know, strewn around the room. And at this point, this is when our new friend Melantho, the slave girl who has been sleeping with some of the suitors, or I guess with Eurymachus,
I believe.
Eurymachus, correct, comes up and takes, you know, yet another opportunity to, like, verbally abuse old man Odysseus. And he gets to give her kind of another warning. He has this moment where he gets to say, you know, why are you pissed off at me? I'm just a beggar, and this is how I have to live. And, you know, I was once in a good place in life, but, you know, Zeus ruined that. Not that Zeus might, you know, do something similar to you, but he also just says, like, you should basically watch your ass. Like, you know, what he says word for word, this is around 82. Like, girl, may you never lose the rank you have among the other slave girls. If your mistress gets angry or Odysseus arrives, it might still happen. So he's just giving her this, like, really kind of ominous warning about, like, what might happen to her. And Penelope is sitting here the whole time listening to this as well, and takes this opportunity to also, you know, chew her slave girl out and scold her for basically treating this servant poorly. And that she has been told that, you know, Penelope wants to speak to this beggar.
Yeah, this is and I like to imagine, like, this whole rest of the scene as being like super, like, if you're to imagine it in a movie-like way. I imagine, like, very low lighting, and, like, you know, it's one of those things where like they're half lit, so you can, like, only half see them, and it's from the fire, and it's dark, obviously, and it's, like, very, I don't know, it's very this is a very mysterious and fun interaction, Penelope and Odysseus.
It's one of those kind of scene settings that you might imagine from, like, a show like Game of Thrones, or like The Tudors or something like that, where it's all, like, really kind of ornately dressed kind of palace rooms, but with, like, very, like, sparse lighting, crackling fire.
Yeah, perhaps only and I know this wasn't really part of your comparison, but less like Game of Thrones, because this sort of scene happens, like, every scene where, like, everyone is at, like, the height of their, or, like, the people who are anyone are at, like, the height of their conversational powers, and they're dropping incredible one-liners and insights, and and like very sort of poetic kind of, or like pseudo poetic phrasing that will sort of stick with you and like really stick the landing of the scene. This is like the first time this has really happened. Like that's why I said this book.
Oh, I'm talking purely about visuals.
Yeah. And it was why I said I know it wasn't part of your comparison.
Yeah.
But you know, to extend the comparison, like this is kind of the first time this has happened. Odysseus usually just like rolls over people. Like people usually take him at his word, or if they or if they question him, they will or Odysseus will like pretty easily explain it away. And this is significantly more complicated because Odysseus is like this again. Like this is kind of the first time that like there's some intrigue, I think, in how he's interacting with the other person.
At least to this level.
Yeah, that like with Eumaeus, like there's a little bit of that. I don't think he ever really had to do that with Telemachus very much. Like he basically revealed him. He was revealed to him pretty quickly, right? He
reveals himself pretty quickly.
Yeah, and this feels like what he was after. I guess like this is where he takes his first step in really getting what he wants, because I don't know how much he's been asking about or thinking about Telemachus, but I feel like Penelope's name has come up a lot. Maybe I'm wrong.
I mean, that's his boo.
Yeah. Like we're talking about like the faithfulness of Penelope, and like how she's been conducting herself over the past 20 years. Yeah, I don't know. And we're also constantly reminded of how Penelope is taking this conversation cautiously as well. We're given like a little bit of interpretive help in how she's dealing with this.
One of the things I love most about this conversation is something that we've kind of talked about before, where you can see kind of the matching of their minds, like, and how well matched they are for each other, because she thinks the same way that he does. And I think this is our first like real opportunity to see this in action. I think it's kind of alluded to or kind of glanced over until this point, and this is the first real like open glimpse that we get into this.
Yeah, and one of the things that stood out to me, well, she in their first, I guess in their first real exchange when they sit down, you know, she has a chair brought out, and Odysseus gets to sit down on it. He has a cushion, and they start their conversation. And Penelope opens by asking him, "Who are you? Where are you from?" Odysseus says, like, "Don't force me to tell you this, because it's a bad memory." And then Penelope gives some of her past to him. She explains all this stuff, and she even gives what I think. And I believe her when she says this. This is something that we talked about in the last episode, because I wasn't sure how to handle her coming out and saying, "It's come time for me to choose someone to marry." This is, I think she's telling the truth, but I also think she could be lying. She tells the story of the shroud that she wove and unwove for Laertes, and she says that she has no more tricks up her sleeve.
Yeah, so this is around like line 155. What she says is, "I have no more ideas, and I cannot fend off a marriage anymore. My parents are pressing me to marry, and my son knows that these men are wasting all his wealth, and he is sick of it." I believe that. But okay, so the thing about this speech that she gives him, which, first of all, I kind of love it, because she starts off by kind of being like, "Oh, you think you know grief? Let me tell you about grief." And she tells all of this stuff about how she has been destroyed, how she has suffered, and, you know, just misses him so much. And it's really kind of like heartbreaking, because he's right there, you know? What really gets to me, and I wrote like, "Aw," next to this, was when she says, like, "I cannot deal with suppliants, strangers, and homeless men who want a job. I miss Odysseus. my heart is melting. And that to me is just like, and especially in the context of what she does say later when she is saying, I have no more ideas after telling the story about the shroud, it strikes me as incredibly honest. It strikes me as just like a woman who is completely exhausted of fending these men off after 20 years of her husband being gone, raising a child who hasn't had his father around and has been like a moody little teenager. And now, like, she just does not have anything else within her. She can't do it anymore.
So she says she has no more ideas, but we know she has at least one more idea, and this, I can't remember when I feel like I remember reading her explaining this. I can't remember if it was in this book or the next book, or if I am just imagining it. But we know that she sets up the test of the axe heads. The archery contest. And for beyond that, she also has the bow, which is used itself a test. Whoever can string this bow and shoot it, which is it's kind of like her shroud idea, where unless a very specific, the shroud was not contingent on anything, but I mean, unless Odysseus, who she believes is dead, or I think she believes is dead, unless Odysseus is there to do it, she'll never have to take someone's hand in marriage, because they won't be able to string the bow and shoot it, which is it has elements of her shroud trick, where it does like I'll marry you on this condition, but I'll also see to it that this condition never met.
Never meet it.
Exactly. So, I mean, maybe she thinks of this later. Maybe she hasn't thought of this yet. But she still has like some mojo left, right? So it's not totally true.
But I will say that, like, throughout, every passage where she talks, like, I can feel her exhaustion.
Oh yeah.
It drips from her words. And so I think, like, while she may technically not be out of ideas, I think she is out of ideas. Because I think that is also just, like, kind of this last thing that she can think of. She's like, okay, this is the last thing that, like, could potentially work. And it should work, but, like, everything else has gone wrong, so why should this work? But yeah, just, like, I feel so bad for her. And I do get the feeling that, like, at least in intent, she's being very honest here. She's being very honestly kind of like open with this stranger who it seems like she has already seen the good in him, Yeah,
it could be. This is a comment that a lot of characters make. She's found him intelligent, and I'm unsure. I'm unsure of what the word for that is. I wonder what that word connotes because like intelligent nowadays doesn't, or maybe it does. Like, does it carry some sense of virtue along with it? Like, in order to be intelligent, you must have.
I feel like they're closely enough associated that, like, it usually does at least a little bit. Like, I think personally, like, a lot of people would hold them somewhat separately, intelligence and wisdom. But I think a lot of people tie it together as well. So I don't think it's so much of an ask to think that, people might kind of still tie that together at least. But I also, like, I don't know, in this context and in this time, like, what the word intelligence would have potentially denoted. Or what that connotation would have been.
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting question. Because, but I mean, I might go back and look for this another time, but I would also like to kind of go back and see, like, what her other impressions of him are, because I know it's not just that, or I feel like it's not just that, necessarily.
Well, there's been at least one instance where I think she says, this man seems intelligent. And, of course, we have Eumaeus telling her that, I think this happened, Eumaeus told her that he says that he has word, or that he's met Odysseus, and she wants to speak with him, which is, you know, what they're getting
makes
at
total sense
here.
and it is what they're getting at here. But so she uses all of this to say, you have to tell me more about who you are. I have to know more about who you are because I've heard that you have word of Odysseus, and now I need to be able to tell, you know, who you are.
Well, also so you say she's being like vulnerable, and in a way she is. Yeah, I think that as I said, like the general truth of what she's saying is there. Like she does miss Odysseus. She is heartbroken and has been, and she feels trapped in this situation. However, she's also trying to get something out of Odysseus. She wants word about Odysseus, what he has to say, and she wants to know about him, which may help inform her, like, you know, okay, can, like, perhaps it just lends credence, like someone being able to talk at length about their past lends credibility to them or something. When you have a conversation with anyone, I haven't personally done therapy. You said you have, right? Like,
Yeah, I love my therapist.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is something that happens in therapy, but like your therapist has to be open with you too, right? Like they or
to an extent, they generally try not to reveal too much about themselves personally, just because, you know, it's ethically
sure. There has to be
thing.
There's an emotional honesty that has to be.
But there is absolutely emotional honesty that's really important to the conversation. Absolutely.
And so opening yourself up to like making yourself a little bit vulnerable, sort of demands that if you're in like any kind of decent company, that's a signal for them to open up to you as well. So Penelope is like giving of herself sort of emotionally.
Yeah.
And
I will
in order
note,
to prompt
like,
him, she asks the same question again. She's like, "Hey, where are you from?" That's what she opens with. Odysseus says no, and then Penelope gives him all of this, and then she ends it by saying, "Now you have to tell me who you are."
now you tell me who you are. I will note that, like, it does open this by saying Penelope said cautiously. I do think that it's fair to kind of read into it that there is a degree to which that she is absolutely kind of using this to prompt him to open up.
Yeah.
To, you know, I think, again, she's very clever. And so I think that there is absolutely reason to believe that she knows that she can use this vulnerability to play to her strengths and to get information out of this person. But it also just feels really honest. And I think it's really kind of speaks to how amazing her character is now that we get to see some more of it.
Yeah.
That she is able to use this emotional honesty and this vulnerability and use it as a way to play him.
Yeah.
Not even knowing that it's her clever ass husband, you know?
Well,
so like
play him is a
so
strong
cool.
word. She's not like conning him out of anything. She's trying to
No, but like just to finesse the situation.
To massage
the
exactly. Although like, you know, she opens the conversation with the question, right? Like, who are your parents? Where's your hometown? And then at the end of her long monologue is no longer a question, it's a demand. I'm curious as to
the master of deception answers her.
Yeah, and then he gives kind of a remix of the story that he's been telling people. It seems like Odysseus's alter ego is from Crete. I don't know if has Odysseus grown up. I guess we learned a little bit about. I don't know if he's like grown up in Crete or spent a lot of time in Crete, but he seems to like it.
I got nothing. I also think it's just one of those things like once you find your alibi, you kind of stick with it so that you don't forget it.
Yeah, like you play D&D, right? Like you could if you had to spin some lie about yourself, and you're in like a fantasy world, you could probably just use that and be like, yeah. I
continue to have to do that. I just started a new campaign,
right?
And our DM just asked me more about my background, and I was like, hold on, got it. Okay, cool. Here we go. You know, so like
Odysseus.
Exactly. I constantly have to pull an Odysseus in D&D. So yeah, so he goes, you know, he spins her some yarn to use for her next shroud. And
nice.
I thank you. My craft references have been like completely on point throughout this entire podcast process. What little of them I have been able to make. So yeah, he tells her like this story, and within that story is how he supposedly met Odysseus in
Mm-hmm.
Crete, gave him guest gifts. He's been driven off course by a storm, you know, and
This was on his way to Troy.
this is on his way to Troy,
So he says.
and this is when old man Odysseus, you know, who is not Odysseus, is supposedly still, you know, a rich man with the capacity to welcome someone into their household.
Well, he casts himself as the younger brother of Idomeneus, which is interesting. He's given like some family lineage whenever he talks about himself as being from Crete in his other Crete-based lies. But I feel like this is the first time he's attached himself to someone specifically, to Idomeneus. I don't know if Aethon or if Ethon is which is the name that he gives, the younger brother of Idomeneus. I don't know if that's a real person. I don't know.
I don't know that either.
I don't know if this
Definitely
can be
don't know that.
corroborated in any way with like worldly knowledge. But
I also kind of wondered to myself as he's telling her this, like, is he telling her these specific details because these are people she would know, and so therefore it would make it like more believable to her?
maybe. I mean, the opposite could be true.
Yeah.
Perhaps
Very much could be like, you know, either she knows them and is like, okay, I'd believe that, or she doesn't know them at all and is just like, okay.
I mean, Idomeneus is a king, right? He's a king, he's a Cretan king, if I remember correctly. This is a high-profile dude, and again, like it's possible that he's attached his name or his lineage to like to other high-profile dudes, but I don't know their names. So that's that could just as easily be a gap in my own knowledge.
I don't know, I just think it's interesting to think of, like, you know, again, I think there's kind of probably a little bit of a reason, at least, that he like goes into so much detail to her, and he has to make it believable to her because he knows that she's not dumb, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So it has to be believable. And it says, you know, after he tells her all of this stuff, it says his lies were like the truth, and as she listened, she began to weep. So, like, obviously she believes this enough to become fully vulnerable and start crying in front of him and really, like, break down.
Yeah, although I do have to say, well, typically, if you cry in front of someone, that is read as a expression of vulnerability. I guess I wonder how, like, if that is read the same way. Obviously, there must be some, but I wonder if it's to the same sort of degree. Like in the Iliad, you know, there are a lot of people who cry. Is a lot of men who cry.
Yeah, definitely. I still think it's vulnerable, though. I think it probably, to at least some degree, has always been regarded as vulnerable just because crying is vulnerable. Like, it just, I don't know, that may just be my opinion, but it just is. Like, crying is vulnerable. And I think it's interesting, like, because I do think it's interesting because in the Iliad, like, all of those scenes where these men are crying are almost always, to my recollection, just in front of other men in a war-like scenario where, like, I think they would understand how difficult things are. And so perhaps that vulnerable, like, moment would be seen a certain way amongst those men. But I don't think it's not vulnerable. I just think it's situational how vulnerable it is seen to be.
And also, I mean, Odysseus, like, we've seen at least a couple instances with the Phaeacians specifically, Odysseus sort of...
Right, and trying to, like, hide it, you know?
Yeah, well, he does that, but what I'm getting at more so is that he is, in this instance, able to keep that back, whereas in those instances, he either wasn't or didn't feel necessarily compelled to, even though he hid it. And here's his wife crying. It says in the text, for a long, long time,
Right.
in front of him.
I feel
And
so bad for her.
yeah, and it has Odysseus. Odysseus pitied his grieving wife inside his heart, but he kept his eyes quite still, without a flicker, like horn or iron, and he hid his tears with artifice.
Yeah, he is just like biting it back as hard as he can. He feels for her. I mean, honestly, this description of like, and right before what you said is this like beautiful Homerian simile, which I actually kind of want to read right now because like the description of this is moving. Her face was melting like the snow that Zephyr scatters across the mountain peaks. Then Eurus thaws it, and as it melts, the rivers swell and flow again. So were her lovely cheeks dissolved with tears. Like, god damn, that's heartbreaking. And then it says, she wept for her own husband who was right next to her. And like, you can just feel the pain, and the difficulty that Odysseus would have had holding back his tears. Like, you can kind of just like, I don't know, I can kind of just viscerally feel that.
Yeah, and I mean, I imagine Odysseus is sort of matching her internally, though not at all externally.
Yeah, exactly.
And what I like is that once they're done with this, they very much get their wits about them, because Penelope asks like immediately after she's done.
Tests him. She cries a bunch and then she tests him, because she's not, she needs actual proof that he's not just bullshitting her, right? So she asks him to describe the clothes that Odysseus was wearing, his men, his clothes, what he looked like. And of course, old man Odysseus is actual Odysseus, so he can describe this to a T.
Yeah.
Like, he's like, this is what my clothes look like. These are my friends. Like, this is what I looked like at the time. Mm-hmm. He's completely correct. And so she's like, okay, you're cool. You are now an honored friend, because those are the exact clothes that I gave to him when he sailed away.
What I also find, I feel like this is kind of a first for Odysseus. After he describes what he was wearing when he left, and Penelope believes him, and she elevates him to an honored guest, so he's no longer just like some beggar. She says I don't remember when she says this, but she'll have him sitting near her, like next to her. Yeah,
she invites him to have a spot at her table next to her son.
Yeah. And after this, Odysseus tells a lot of very true things.
Yes, he does. He tells her like half the story, kind of.
Yeah, he says, he assures her that she's alive, that he's alive. And near here, he says in Thesprotia, which is not true, of course. But he follows that with, the story of cattle of the sun. He follows that with his visit. Yeah, losing the ship, washing up at the Phaeacians, sending him along. He adds a part, which is kind of funny. He says he would have been here in Ithaca long ago, but he decided he should travel more and gather greater wealth. No man on earth knows better how to make a profit.
Gotta pat yourself on the back there a little bit.
So after having established his credibility, he adds another thing and assures her that Odysseus is coming home. And this kind of reads as an attempt to make her feel better. He didn't need to say this.
No. But he also, at the very end of this entire speech that he gives her, he makes it incredibly specific. Really blatantly clear exactly how sure he is of this and exactly when he will come home. You know, he says he's safe and near at hand. He will swear this by Zeus. It will come true this very lunar month. Between the waning and the waxing moon, Odysseus will come. Like, that's really specific.
I mean, specificity adds credibility to any claim.
Yeah, and he has literally just proven that with being able to describe, you know, the exact clothes that Odysseus was wearing. So it's like, this is, he's giving her actual real hope here.
Yeah, more substantive than I imagine anything she's gotten. Although...
And she still doubts it.
yeah, she still does doubt it. She is still possessed by the grief in her heart.
So sad. But I feel like you were gonna say something right before that.
No, I don't think so. Or if I was, I've lost it.
Okay, fair.
We can move on to Eurycleia if we want.
Yeah, this is also like a really kind of sweet, punctuated by slightly violent behavior, but a very sweet moment. So she, you know, says, you know, okay, well, I'm still pretty sure he's dead. But, you know, let's have the slaves go off and wash you and get you some clean sheets, and then, you know, you will be my honored guest. And he's like, well, hold on. I don't want anyone to bathe me unless they're, like, actually trustworthy. It's interesting because his, like, criteria for who can bathe him, like, don't make sense to me. Not that they don't make sense to me, but just, like, the way that it's worded is really interesting. Because he says, I don't care for foot baths. Don't let any of these slave women in your house come near my feet unless there is an old one whom I can trust who has endured the same heartbreak and sorrow as myself. If so, I would not mind if she touches my feet. And it was just like, what?
Yeah, this is also probably something that we are so culturally distant from that it feels out of left field. This is a guess. But I mean, like, you know, feet. And being bathed by someone else. It's not something that we do really anymore.
Speak for yourself.
Like
no, I'm kidding. I'm kidding completely, but I had to make that joke. I had to make the joke.
Sure, yeah. I mean, yeah. But you know, I wonder. Like he's very specific. You know, like what is there about? Like, is there a special something about? Or having your feet washed? Like,
well, I know there is in the context of Christianity, because I've heard that before. This is obviously not what we're dealing here.
Yes,
but I also would imagine that, like, in a general kind of sense, it's kind of seen as something that is a specific kind of act of kindness to someone who has been, you know, traveling or up on hard times, or just like a kind of tender special act. Because feet are used a lot. We walk on them, we kick with them, we do all, you know, kinds of things on our feet. So they get a lot of use and they hurt. So, like, washing and caring for someone's feet is like caring for a very important part of the body. I don't know. I'm really just bullshitting here.
Yeah, I wonder if Odysseus is bullshitting too, right? It's like. Oh,
I mean, he's definitely bullshitting. I mean, he's all the time.
So he's clearly bullshitting, but. That's such a, like, of all the reasons
it's really specific
to give,
I'm just saying it's
very
really
specific.
Like, it is very specific, and it caught me off guard, you know, as so many of these things that, like, sometimes they just say really specific reasons for, like, why someone should or should not do something, and I'm just like, that was really detailed. Okay.
Well, it reminds me of when Penelope was really excited when Telemachus sneezed in the hallway.
Yeah, like, I love that moment so
like,
much.
It feels like
I
no one
really love that moment so much.
It doesn't phase anyone. This doesn't phase Penelope. Like, she in fact she says, like, oh, that's, like, very well spoken of you. She calls him scrupulous. Never has a foreigner from a strange land been so scrupulous. I have a sensible old woman talking about Eurycleia, who brought my husband, and then she does a very makes a very specific comparison between the stranger Odysseus and the man Odysseus. She says, "Get up now, Eurycleia. Wash your master's age mate." It's such a specific and weird way of referring to someone else.
Honestly, just those 3 lines, like at the end there, I starred and underlined all of them because I really liked what she said after that, though. Like, she says, "Get up now, Eurycleia, wash your master's age mate. By now, Odysseus himself must have old wrinkled feet and hands like these. We mortals grow old fast in times of trouble." And I was just like, ooh, that's a line. Like, that's a line. We mortals grow old fast in times of trouble. That just feels like so much of a fucking thing to tell. Like, I know she's saying it to this guy, but Odysseus is the one she's telling this to, who has had, like, the 20 years to match all 20 years that someone could go through, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And...
Well, the thing that stands out most is how she refers to Odysseus. Yeah, your master, Eurycleia, your master's age mate. Like, she doesn't say wash this stranger's feet. She doesn't even call him by the name that he gave her. I don't know if this name is ever used ever. I guess I'll keep an eye out for it if that ever is the case. But yeah, like she has there are many other ways she can refer to this person in reality.
Yeah.
Who
I also wonder, like, this is definitely one of those moments where I wonder about the translation, because, like, how close is it? You know, why did Emily Wilson choose age mate?
That feels specific enough to be, like, probably very
close to the original Greek.
Like, that, just as a feeling.
Yeah, could be. And if so, I think it makes your question all the more kind of relevant, you know? Because if it actually is age mate, then, like, why say it that way?
So Penelope points out these 2 similarities between the stranger Odysseus and the real person Odysseus. You know, so they look similarly aged, and she compares their hands and feet. Now, of course, being a suspicious reader myself, I wonder, has she figured out that this guy is Odysseus or not? That's the question. But I feel like the answer is fairly definitively no.
I think so too.
Because I can't remember if this is in this book or if it's a later book. But Penelope expresses to the gods, like, you know, her sadness and stuff like that. And we can, when she's having discussion with, like, a real person like Odysseus or old man Odysseus, we can see, okay, she'd have reason to, like, you know, guard her speech and speak carefully and cautiously and all that, but not when you're praying. Like, when you're praying, You're usually pretty open and vulnerable. And I feel like why would she express what she's expressing in this way while she's praying?
If she knows that this is
that she knows this is Odysseus. Yeah,
exactly.
Because there's
I'm with you
question.
completely on that. No, I just think this is her, like, continuing to be mopey about him and being like, my Odysseus would look like this. I miss him.
Yeah.
I think it's one of those.
Yeah, sure. Like, where every little thing reminds you of that person you're missing.
Or it makes you think of that. Like, I'm not sure it reminds her of him, but it makes her wonder, like, what he would look like now and what he must look like now, because it's been so long, you know?
Yeah, or like you're walking down the street and you're like, oh, like, he would have really liked this, or, you know,
exactly that kind of thing. So she asks Eurycleia to wash his feet, and Eurycleia, you know, cries and basically says, you know, like, oh, I'm useless now, and everything is so terrible, but yeah, sure, I'll wash his feet. Penelope told me to wash your feet, and I will wash your feet. I mean, I feel like Eurycleia is the one who kind of gives it away more, because even before she finds, you know, what will happen is she's about to find this scar on his leg. that is dead giveaway that is actually Odysseus. But before that actually happens, what she says is like, I have never seen any man whose body, voice, and feet are so much like my master's.
Yeah, I have that underlined as well.
Which is just like, you know, dead giveaway.
It premonitions what she's about to do, which is, you know, actually identify him.
And he knows this too. So like she prepares this foot bath. He sits there by the hearth and hurriedly turns around to face the darkness because he has this premonition that as soon as she touches his leg, that she will feel the scar and she's going to know immediately. And that's exactly what happened. She feels the scar, and I think it's really interesting that it tells us like the full story of how he got the scar.
Yeah, a hunting accident. A boar gashed his leg with its tusk. So I guess coming out of the Iliad, I'm used to like these sorts of asides happening a lot, as we just talked about. Like those sorts of things come out. But I guess in this case, it feels a little more out of place because it happens so rarely. But I mean, it places us in the memory, for sure.
So what I like about it, and I think you're right, because like these kind of throwback stories happen a lot less in the Odyssey as compared to the Iliad. And I feel like you have probably used this reference before. It brings me back to the like Anton Ego moment in Ratatouille, where he tastes the ratatouille and is like brought back to that moment in time.
Oh yeah, sure. Like,
and it kind of reminds me of that. So like Eurycleia feels this scar, and then it just brings her back. I mean, this is not what it's necessarily saying here, but that's kind of, it reminded me a little bit about that. You know, you see the child Anton Ego being, you know, given a bowl of ratatouille by his mother after skinning his knee, and then he jumps back into the present. But you can just tell that moment was like that like flashback moment for him. This kind of feels like that to me.
It definitely serves a strong narrative purpose for sure. Because it would be one thing to say like, oh, she felt a scar that she knew he had, and then it went on from there, right?
Yeah.
But it's another thing to actually give it. This would be a story which is obviously told and performed. So in a way, this is all telling, but this is as good as you can get with showing over telling, where we're not only told that she's familiar with this, we're also shown why and where. You know, she knew him when this happened, and yeah, as I said, it attaches them.
It does, in like a really kind of sweet way. And especially since, you know, the next thing that happens is it brings us back to the present moment. She feels the scar, and, you know, she just like drops his foot into the basin, you know, it splashes, the foot bath, you know, it gets knocked over and the water like spills all across the floor, and she just starts crying. And so I think it just makes that moment even more kind of personal, that knowing the background and knowing that kind of narrative part of it behind the scenes. And yeah, they're reunited, and she knows that it's him. She says, you know, Odysseus, Odysseus, and she kind of looks over to Penelope, who has had her mind literally turned aside by Athena so that she doesn't know this yet. And this is when we get the like slightly violent moment that I was talking about, because Odysseus has the reaction, you know, he sees her like looking over towards Penelope and like grabs her by the throat and is like, don't you fucking tell her.
This is it's weird, like what the intentions are all over the place. Like it seems like Odysseus very specifically wanted Eurycleia.
I think so.
To wash his feet. Like the way, like, oh, if only you had like an older slave, right? Someone who's
wink,
like
wink,
under
nudge, nudge, someone who's been through like
a
whole lot of shit.
And of course, she comes up with Eurycleia, who happens to have known him a long time, and she has like strong feelings about and for Odysseus. So it seems like he wanted to meet her. And it even seems like he wanted, So if I want to follow his line of thought, Penelope she's the one who suggests that he get a bath, right? That he get washed. And Odysseus probably, again, if we want to like infer what he might be thinking, he probably knows that it would be weird for him to refuse. So he makes very specific stipulations. But those stipulations are most likely to lead to someone knowing who he is. Like if one of the younger slaves washed his feet, like there would be the scar. Yeah, they probably wouldn't give a. Although if they notice it, perhaps they would tell Penelope like, "Oh, he has this scar on his leg or something." So perhaps his intentions were to like get ahead of the narrative of his scar on the off chance that it comes up. But then again, like Eurycleia knows instantly.
Yeah, she does. Yeah, and he knows that she's going to know too. But the thing is, like, I think it's also really interesting what he says to her, as he grabs her by the throat. And because he does say, like, you have found out, a god has put the knowledge in your mind. I feel like this is like classic Odysseus. Like language styling, and he tells her like nobody can know, or I will promise that like when I kill all these suitors and then the bad slave girls, I will count you among them, even though you fed me at your boob.
Yeah.
So like it's really interesting. It's like this is a result that you knew was, like you knew this was gonna happen. You almost kind of willed this into existence in a way. But like you just say it as if like some god has put the knowledge into your mind. Like she wasn't going to recognize the scar.
Yeah, it's puzzling. This is either not Odysseus's brightest moment, or this is Odysseus making the best of a situation where he anticipates that he might be found out sooner than he wanted to.
Yeah, and I think it's like possibly getting found out by the right person so that he can now bring her onto their side, which is basically what he does. He gets her to say that, she's gonna tell him about all of the women who, who are good and all of them who are not good. Which he kind of says like, oh, I don't really, like, why do you think I need that information from you? Like, I can do that by myself. But I think that's the moment where he knows that, like, she's cool. Like, I don't have to worry about Nanny, which, like,
yeah,
you knew that. You knew you were never going to have to worry about Nanny. Nanny's cool.
Yeah, it's I've been melting down for the last 5 minutes. I don't know. I can't fully parse what exactly is happening here. Like the fact that Odysseus stipulated that he wanted someone older suggests that he suspects that him getting his feet washed will be his undoing. But the stipulation also ensures that he'll be found out.
Yeah.
So
it's a really interesting kind of conundrum. I'm not sure that I know completely what to make of it, but I feel like what I just said before was like kind of my read on it. And I'm sticking with that.
It's a curious exchange.
But I will note that he does it before this next curious exchange. He covers up his scar. It's very specifically pointed out that, he gets washed and oiled and then covers himself back up with rags, but specifically his scar.
Yeah, and then he confers again with Penelope, or Penelope confers with him, I guess.
Yeah. She's still sad. But this is where she gets to ask him about the test. And this is really interesting to me. Mm-hmm. Because, like, I don't know. I know that she now trusts him, obviously, because of his ability to convey, this accurate information to her. And he makes this very specific, I guess, prophecy? Not really, though, because, like, he just makes this very specific statement about exactly when Odysseus is going to come home. So it does feel like she trusts him now. But she's kind of asking him, like, what do you think I should do? Should I marry one of these guys, or should I just stay here and support my son and keep things the same to respect my husband and our marriage bed?
Yeah, there's that.
And then there's the goose dream.
Yeah, there's the goose dream. What's infuriating is that were it not for a couple passages, this whole exchange reads so much differently. Like, this whole exchange reads very much like them both hinting at the same thing, the same sort of possibility. Is like Penelope is giving him these opportunities to reveal himself to her.
Could be.
Like, you know, she's very pointed about this dream. She's very pointed about, like pointing out the similarities between Old Man Odysseus and Odysseus. If we want to read even further into it, we can read the idea that, you know, he's going to get a foot bath as like a play to like see if if this stranger has the same markings as Odysseus. If we wanted to, we could read that into it.
And she could be like expecting, you know, Nanny to come back and be like, piss, 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 this is what's going on.
Yeah, and the contest with the axes. You know, she details this to the stranger, and asks. I don't know if she asks specifically, but she prompts or allows space for his input, and at every opportunity, Odysseus doesn't reveal himself to her. Which, and again, were it not for like some parts where, you know, like again, we have that prayer she makes to the gods where she still seems saddened that Odysseus isn't there, even though without that prayer it seems like she would have that possibility that this guy might be Odysseus. Like, if Eurycleia can tell it's him just by his voice and his body, like Penelope must, right? Like that.
There gotta be some, like, you know, alarm bells ringing. I think it's interesting because I think like the other way that you could potentially read it is that he keeps giving her little chunks of details about when Odysseus is going to get home, and she may be just pressing him even more. Could she also potentially think that this is a god or a prophet who is potentially bringing Odysseus back to her? But I think what you said has like a lot of merit to it, just because of like, I think it is interesting to think of the foot bath as kind of a test to see like if they will recognize anything about him. But it also is, you know, a fairly traditional, like, yeah, you invite your honored guest in and you have them bathed. Like, that seems like a normal ritual.
Yeah, for sure. And again, like it's like so close to being there, that having that intrigue, but there are a couple parts where it especially with like Eurycleia noticing that this stranger is Odysseus, she turns to Penelope to say something, but the passage says that Athena had turned her mind aside and had turned Penelope's mind aside.
Yeah, and not just her eyes. Like, it's not that she doesn't want her to see Eurycleia, is that her mind is turned aside. So, like, I just feel like Athena is actually, like, mind controlling her in a subtle way to, like, not think that this is Odysseus, you know, or not know that this is Odysseus, even if she has some suspicions.
But yeah, that's time it. She details her plan to set up this contest, and she kind of wistfully fancies what will happen when someone wins. Like, whoever strings this bow, Odysseus's bow, most readily and shoots through all 12 axes, will win me, and I will follow him. I'll be parted from here, this lovely house, my marriage home, so full of wealth and life, which I suppose I'll remember even in my dreams. It's a very, like, kind of poetic way of putting this this future that she's envisioning.
Yeah, that, like, makes her absolutely miserable to think about.
Yeah, but at the same time, this is like Odysseus's bow is very hard to string, and like no one can, as we know later, no one can string it except for, of course, Odysseus.
Yeah.
Which, and this is the second time that like all the heroes have a weapon that sort of defines them. Like Achilles has his Peleonash spear, which only he can wield. It's not even like it's like it looks cool. It's like only they can wield it. And Odysseus is kind of,
it is their weapon, like trademark Odysseus's bow.
which is also a little bit weird because Odysseus, I mean, we know he's strong, and with the god's help, he can be very strong, but he's not known for his strength. Right? Like, getting a little bit ahead of myself, and the story, because this happens at book 21, is it? I think it's book 21, where he strings the bow. But this isn't something he's known for. Like,
yeah, it's 21.
His strength. It feels like someone should be sufficiently strong enough to. I've never strung a bow, I guess. So
yeah, I think I would like to revisit that when we do get to
we'll put
book 21.
We'll put a pin in it. We'll put a pin in it.
We'll put a pin in that, but I definitely want to talk about it. Like, I absolutely want to talk about it. And this is, I think, the first time we really, like, get the description of what is going to happen in that book. So it's definitely a good place to bring it up. But I do want to pin that for later because we will get more in depth in that in a really fun way.
God, there's so much in this, but this is why I said, like, this book excited me more than the next book.
Oh, yeah.
Because this feels like such a pivotal encounter where so much is said, and I'm not, of course, at all familiar with like what academic discourse is around the Odyssey, but I imagine that book 19 is big on,
I would imagine,
like,
so too.
Dissecting what Odysseus and Penelope's inner lives are. I
mean, I think
moments.
this book for me is definitely like the one out of the two of these that makes me very like excited in terms of picking it apart, whereas the next book like makes me excited in terms of like just building the sense of dread that comes to fruition in the next couple books. I think that's where like it's more exciting to me, but in a different way, whereas this book is extremely exciting to me, but more in like the intellectual picking it apart kind of way. That book just like I read it and I like feel uncomfortable as hell by the end of it. And I like how it like instills that response in you.
Yeah, every book that involves Odysseus and the suitors in the same room is very off balancing, or very like everything feels off balance. Like everything's at a constant Dutch angle.
It is. Oh, that's the best
really
way of describing it. That's really a great way of describing it. So, I mean, that is kind of, where this book leaves us. Odysseus responds to Penelope and says, like, it's okay. They won't be able to string his bow and he will be back. Don't worry about it. You don't need to postpone the contest because, it's doom time.
And then, they go to sleep.
And this is where we will take a brief little intermission, and we will be back very shortly with book 20, The Last Banquet. So we will see you all very soon. Stop dabbing. Stop dabbing. He's trying to throw me off going into the intermission. All right, we will be back with you all very shortly.
Hello, dear listener. We hope you've enjoyed listening to the first part of this episode of Homer Bound. There's more to come afterward, but I'd like to take a moment on this break to say a few special thank yous. First, thank you for listening. This podcast has no sponsor. Everything is produced in-house, on our own time, and fueled by our own interests. Sharing in our interests means a great deal to us, and knowing that others enjoy the content means even more. Please follow us on our Twitter at Homer_bound for new episodes, or just keep an eye on the podcast page, wherever you happen to be listening. I'd like to give another special thank you to my friend Llama for hosting the show with me, And I'd like to thank the composer and performer of the music you've been hearing during the transitions, who has said he'd like to be known simply as Llama's father. Thank you, Llama's father. I'd also like to thank Bubbo for her contributions to the audio, Webs2D for some original art, and Total Love for additional art and graphic design. And Ghosty also for additional graphic design. Another special thank you to our numerous guests for lending us their time and expertise. And a last but not least thank you to Dr. Daniel, who anchors every one of our episodes with his insights on our discussions. We appreciate his time and energy, and we encourage you to stick around at the end of the episode to make sure you hear what he has to say. Please consider reading along with us as you listen. We are reading the Emily Wilson translation, and while reading the text isn't necessary for you to follow along, you'll likely get more out of our discussions if you have. Feel free to pause and return later if you wish to do so. Okay, thanks for sticking through our break. I'll give it back to me and Llama on Homeward Bound.
And we are back. I have refreshed my cup of tea. I've actually switched teas. Gone from almond sunset celestial seasonings to a honey chamomile tea. Honey chamomile tea. I just can't.
Your wire switching crossing with words has been.
I can't do words today. Apparently.
Is this early onset something?
It's actually, it may well be.
There's no.
I will say I did mention this to you. I've been getting a teeny bit of a headache, so that might just be my brain being like, please, less braining.
Calm down.
I don't know, but I'm getting ahead of it.
It's been an intense week. You've been back in class. Lots of reading. You said hundreds of pages.
I'm reading many of the pages. I am going to class. I had to get my brand new computer repaired this week, which is equally unfun. So it's been a week for me. So I'm not entirely surprised that my brain is just like, please, this is a Wendy's, please stop. But yeah, words are hard, as it turns out. But I have refreshed myself. I have refreshed my tea. Hopefully this will help me relax and get into my Zen place as we talk about book 20, which is, like, as I was saying before, dreadful and foreboding. I hope you have also refreshed yourself, gotten perhaps a new beverage or something.
Yes, I have stretched my water and refilled my water.
Did you play any Darkest Dungeon?
Nope.
Okay. The game constitutional breaks have been, very funny to me. 'Cause I'll go fetch my tea and come back, and sometimes, we're ready to go, and sometimes it's like, oh crap, my character just took a crit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we did still talk about food and stuff. Speaking of food, just to, I guess, get right into it. Where is it? Oh, yeah. This is in, like, the first few lines of the book. There's a food epic simile describing how Odysseus sleeps, because, it's nighttime, or tries to sleep. It's nighttime, they've gone to bed.
Oh, yeah.
And it shows Odysseus, or the poet describes Odysseus as writhing around, as when a man rotates a sausage full of fat and blood, the huge fire blazes, and he longs to have the roasting finished. So he squirmed his way in that. I figured that simile would speak to you.
It does.
Because we know how much you love food.
Like, I do. I love cooking. I love food. I am a self-admitted foodie, even though I sometimes kind of hate that word. Because everyone's just like, I'm a foodie. And I'm just like, yeah, you eat food like the rest of us. However, I will not go on that rant right now. And instead, I will say that that simile very much did speak to me, as do, like, I mean, I've said this many times before throughout, our adventures throughout the
Hmm.
Odyssey. Like, the Odyssey makes me hungry. There's a lot of descriptions of food, and, like, most of them sound really good. There are some of them that are kind of gross, but most of them sound fantastic.
Well,
And
there's also like the way in which food is referred to. Like the phrase, like in the Iliad especially, like it says like they reached out for the good things that lay before them, and once every man had satisfied his need for food and drink.
yeah,
That it feels that statement will feel so like complete, you know.
it does, and it gives you this picture of food as kind of like what it is, a restorative, like, comforting thing.
Yeah, and even in the Odyssey, I don't know if that's I feel like that particular phrase has been in the Odyssey as well, but
I think it has.
like after a feast, say like after every man had satisfied his need for food and drink, or something like that, something similar to that. It is constantly reminding us of what it feels like to be full, which is a
Yeah.
very satisfying memory and feeling to have. It's a memory if you're not full at this very moment, because like so often we're at neutral. I think like, or at least I live at general neutral. I don't usually eat to like great fullness, not like bursting fullness,
Yeah.
but like like I'm satisfied now. Like I don't
Yeah.
think I could eat more, even though I probably could at the same time. It's a good thought to have.
It is a good thought to have. It again, I think it is like restorative and comforting and familiar also.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, like, hopping right into it, Odysseus can't sleep and is writhing around like a juicy sausage.
Or like a man who's waiting for their sausage to be roasted.
Yeah, true. I think it is actually alluding to
That's what
that
the
a little
simile is
bit
going
more.
for.
Yeah.
Although I'm with you there as well. At first I thought, as like my mind read the words before I read them, I was like, is this comparing Odysseus to a sausage?
Honestly, I think it can be a little bit of both, because I think it's like, he rideth the round as when a man rotates a sausage full of fat and blood, the huge fire blazes, and he longs to have the roasting finished. Like, I think it can apply to both of those things, honestly.
if you
Not sure
want
that
it,
that's the intent.
it seems like it's generally referring
But
to
it's
the
also the
man,
way
but
it
you
says
could
right
for
after
sure.
that, so he squirmed this way and that, which kind of just gives me the image of, like, a sausage being rotated over a fire and, like, turning
Yeah,
it
for
back
sure.
and
It's
forth to find the parts that are less done and more done. So, like, I think it evokes both of those images for me.
yeah,
But yeah,
it definitely evokes that.
but if Athena comes to him, I think,
Well, we should mention real quick why he's even
oh,
having difficulty
very fair.
sleeping, which is he hears the treacherous slave girls who are sleeping with the other suitors running around and giggling and whatever, and Odysseus is once again haunted by his. I guess we can refer to them as sort of baser instincts, where he's just like, I want to kill them. I want
I
to,
was
or
just
like,
gonna say that we should start, like, an Odysseus murder fantasy counter, because we'd be getting up there in the numbers at this point, and we'll continue to do so. It does. He kind of gives into that more base, like, I just want them dead, and I want
yeah.
to do it. You know?
But as with all the other times where he's sort of fantasized about killing those who are wronging him or his household in some way, he keeps it back. Although it's externalized much more intensely here. The poem reads as him slapping his chest, and he says, "Be strong, my heart," which I think is a funny way of externalizing this inner conflict.
It is, isn't it?
We've come across multiple passages in both the Iliad and even in the Odyssey where men will slap their thighs in like specifically says like they slap their thighs in usually as an expression of irritation or aggravation or something like that. And this feels reminiscent of that as well.
It does. Yeah, I agree with you completely there. Like it's very reminiscent of that. And then this point is when Athena comes to him. And I think what seems to be her, truest state as, a woman, and he knows it is her immediately, and she's like, why are you awake? This is your this is your house, this is your wife, this is your kid, what's up? He says kind of what we know they're thinking about, both of them, because we already know Athena is ready to go. And Odysseus is thinking, and and this is also one of those moments where it says clever Odysseus said. So it can be somewhat inferred that this might be him framing his words really carefully. But he tells her, like, how am I supposed to attack these guys? I feel like, there's going to be blowback. I'm going to be punished in some way for this.
Yeah, I imagine there would be some social upset, and because these are all powerful men, from what I understand, or powerful enough at least to vie for Penelope's hand. It's difficult for me to tell. Also, just on the note of like this line has clever Odysseus. In previous lines, we get things like Odysseus, well known for his intelligence, or scheming Odysseus. Difficult to tell if this is a rendering of an epithet or if this is a signal for us to read the passage a certain way. But at the very least, when Odysseus says, "Be strong, my heart," he invokes the time when he kept his cool in the Cyclops cave, and this is a similar example of forethought, where
it is.
He could have killed the Cyclops as he slept, but the rock would have kept him and his men, or would have trapped him and his men in. And this is something similar. He's not just thinking, okay, how am I going to kill the suitors? But he's thinking, okay, I can easily do this.
But
what about the consequence? What after? What is the state of things afterwards? So the method of forethought, at the very least, between that past story and what is happening now is certainly present.
Definitely. Yeah, and I think Athena's response to him also kind of goes along, I don't know. I absolutely started with a thought there and then completely lost it, like, starting my sentence. I really like her response, though, and I'm trying to figure out what it was about it.
Well, this is a trouble that I think hounds even, like, people who are presently religious, like, today, right? It's like, I'm thinking specifically in terms of Christianity because I was raised Christian, so I'm most familiar with that.
Yeah.
But there's, like, this weird paradox, or maybe it's not a paradox, I'm not sure what the correct word is, but, like, why should you worry about anything if an all-powerful force is in control of things? And it's, like, worrying is very human. Even if, like, intellectually we can know that everything will be okay, and that everything is going according to some plan, even with that knowledge, we can still worry as if that certainty isn't there. We can be of many minds about it, if we want to if we want to steal Odysseus's descriptor. And that seems to be the headspace that Odysseus is in.
Okay.
And Athena is pointing out this paradox or this problem to him that I just described, this sort of double-minded way of thinking about the world.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where my mind was going. I'm just, like, having trouble putting it into words. But it is kind of her way of just being like, hey, like, I'm a goddess,
Yeah.
And I get why you're worried, but, like, I've been watching over you this entire time, so don't. Everything is going to be good. You're not going to be in trouble.
Yeah, but we're so fleshy and vulnerable and
oh yeah,
killable.
Like,
Odysseus is familiar with that.
He's extremely human. And, like, if you think about it, like, how many people he's seen die in those very experiences that she talked about where she's watching over him. Like, he's seen a lot of the ways in which mortality can express itself.
And even on that subject, I feel like we've come across a good number of instances where someone will say something along the lines of like humans are weak or humans are I can't remember a specific situation, but I know it's come up a whole bunch of times.
Definitely.
And that's part of the substance of what Athena says. She's so stubborn. Most men trust friends, even weaker mortal friends, whose judgment is far worse than mine. I am a goddess, and I have watched over you. And it's just even though Odysseus, as sort of demonstrated in his brief exchange with Telemachus, even though Odysseus is well used to the presence of the gods, it is so alien a headspace.
It is
to be in.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, Athena, manages to kind of just put him to sleep and relaxes him, releases him from these worries because, again, she's a frickin' god. She can do that. And this is when Penelope wakes up and, she's still crying. She's just always crying. And she basically prays to the gods, prays to Artemis most of all, to kill her, which is really depressing. And is this what wakes Odysseus up? Or does he just like wake up on his own?
So the timeline is
unclear.
Weird. Because Odysseus goes to sleep. This is the passage. With that, the goddess drenched his eyes with sleep, then flew back to Olympus. Sleep took hold, relaxed him, and released him from his worries. Meanwhile, suggesting that this is sort of a concurrent event, his faithful wife had woken up crying and sitting upright in her bed against soft pillows. When her sobs subsided, she prayed, blah, 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 blah. Artemis, please kill me. I don't know if it's like a earnest request or like a I would be better off dead sort of thing where you don't wish or you don't want to kill yourself, but you're like, man, it'd be better if I wasn't born or if I was dead or something like that. Anyway, so she prays this prayer, and then the text says, as she said this, the golden dawn arrived, suggesting that Odysseus has probably
slept through this.
Or rather, as she said this, golden dawn arrived, Odysseus heard his wife weeping and became confused, suggesting that he is now awake. So he has slept for however long it takes for her to pray this prayer, if we are to read the suggested timeline of this sequence of events as it is presented.
Well, and kind of imagining how long the whole conversation from the last book took place, I would imagine this is, Odysseus is getting to sleep pretty early in the morning. I can't imagine it would have been super long before it was morning again.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it is possible that he just took like a couple minutes of sleep.
I feel like it's probably like, like a good length cat nap, at least.
Perhaps time is a little bit convoluted.
It could be. It seems that way to me. I mean, I also just can't. Yeah, it's just unclear in this instance. I think, honestly, a lot of times in the Odyssey, time seems pretty clear to me.
I feel like this is at least the second time we've wrestled with when dawn has
arrived. The other time it was the end all at once, dawn
yes. Came. Yeah.
Which, again, could be interpreted multiple ways, although I think the context around it kind of helps narrow that down a little bit.
It strongly suggests that, yeah, I mean, I think we eventually came to an agreement on that, so. And I was less confused. This one is, like, a little
This one
odd.
is, I think, a little more, like, vague, because Odysseus is put to sleep, and, yeah. So, anyways, aside from the, like, weird kind of fucky time issue, Odysseus wakes up to the sound of Penelope crying and thinks that she's like right there and that she has made him, that she has discovered that he is not old man Odysseus, that he is just Odysseus. And he then goes out to pray into the courtyard to have Zeus like give him a sign in two ways, like an actual physical or an actual sign from Zeus himself, but also a person who will speak words of omen. And Zeus is like,
Yeah.
yeah, sure. And he's asking this to see, have I been brought back here on purpose? Have I gone through all of this suffering, all of this turmoil for a reason so that I can be home? And this is why you've done this. And Zeus is like, yeah, dude.
Yeah, Odysseus is wrestling, I think, with a very real feeling that I think people pretty much universally get when they're coming close to completing something that's big, like when you're about to graduate or get married or move to a nice spot or something like that. You're like, I can't believe I'm here. Like, I can't believe this is happening. I have to like pinch myself to see if I'm awake, that sort of thing.
Yeah. And in this case, Odysseus is asking Zeus to pinch him with like godlike signs,
Yeah, and this, of course, off the back of Athena giving him like assurances that this is all going according to plan, and this is not apparently saying it's not enough for him I think is not giving him enough credit. It's probably enough for him, but there is always like the comfy sort of like if you have a friend or a family member or someone and like they say I love you, it's like you can intellectually know that they love you or whatever or how they feel about you, but having them say it or repeat it there's just something there. There's something more than
such a more mundane example of that, which was that like, if you ever like leave the house and lock the door and a friend is like going with you to the car and you locked the door, but then you're like, you saw me lock the door, right?
Yeah, or my mind was going to go to like checking your pocket for your car keys, even though you know that you took them off the table.
Oh my god, I habitually do that. I look for my car keys all the time, even though I know that they're always in the same place.
Yeah, we do feel a constant need to reaffirm what we know is already true.
Yeah, like we always are going to want reassurances, even though something can be like right in front of you. And Zeus is totally down with this. He's like, you want assurances? I will give you assurances. Here is someone talking in omens, and he has one of
and here's thunder.
Slaves who work the mills say like, oh, surely the suitors, will be having their last meal, tonight. And I pray that this is their final meal. Okay, that's one. And then thunder, boom. Look, I'm the god of thunder. I made it thunder. That's sign number 2. And Odysseus is like, okay, this is fantastic. It's just, he gets both of his signs.
Although Zeus did fulfill them in inverted order. Odysseus asks for spoken words of omen, and then he asks for a sign outside, and then Zeus answers with a sign outside and then an omen. I'm unsure if that's significant at all, but, it's
I don't think it is that much, He got both of the signs.
Yeah, he got what he wanted. He got what he wanted. And the text says that he goes in with greater certainty that he will have his revenge.
He's happy about it. He's like, wow, that was a literal direct answer to the question that I just asked you.
I think also as a reader, it's useful to have something like this because I think it's easy to get caught up in almost a sort of superhuman mind game planning sort of way of viewing Odysseus. Like, oh, he has this plan, it's going to go off. But Odysseus knows, as we also know, that people are unpredictable and things are unpredictable. And Odysseus can still have doubts, and he's probably failed in his plans before. And so having this uncertainty on his end lets us, I guess, see him as like not this superhuman, supercomputer planner sort of guy, even though he's like,
definitely
well known for his intelligence and well known for his plans.
It definitely humanizes him. It goes a long way to do that because it just points out those like little doubts and fears that make people human, and those reassurances that we need as humans. I think it does a lot to do that. So yeah, and he gets what he wants. And this is when, Telemachus gets out of bed, gets dressed, puts his sword on, and calls out to Nanny to make sure that, Odysseus has gotten food, has gotten a comfortable bed. And this is when Nanny tells him, well, he drank some wine, he chose a chair, he talked to your mother. Does she say that? Yeah, because he basically kind of says that, his mom has a habit of, treating kind of crappy guests well and turning the good ones away.
This is one of those parts where I think we're seeing old Telemachus pop back in.
Yeah.
It's written at least as a as kind of a scolding remark. This is typical of Mother. She may be clever, but she acts on whims. She treats unwanted guests with great respect and rudely sends the better ones away. These are sort of condemning kinds of words.
Oh, for sure. And that's also the way that, Eurycleia takes that. But I also just think that, after having lived with this, person for so long, it's possible that Telemachus doesn't realize, how he talks about his mother.
Yeah, and Eurycleia is giving the reasons that he may not have considered, right?
Exactly.
Odysseus, the old man, has chosen to sleep on the floor outside, as opposed to Penelope purposefully treating him poorly.
Yeah, definitely. And then and he tells her that, she gives him that insight, and then she basically kind of shoos the rest of the slave girls off to get prepping for this festival that they're going to have, this grand banquet.
Mm.
They go off, they follow orders, and Eumaeus, the swineherd, kind of comes around. He comes around
he
with
brings pigs.
A few big old pigs for the feast, and then kind of sees Odysseus and inquires as to, how he's doing. Are they treating you as crappily as they were before? Are they being a little bit more respectful to you? And Odysseus is just yeah, they're gonna not do well, Or he asks the gods, he tells Eumaeus that the gods should avenge them for how awful they are, which just, tells you everything that you need to know. And in addition to Eumaeus bringing the pigs, Melanthius, our nasty old friend, brings some fat goats up and starts picking on Odysseus again. And this gives us a chance to add 1 to the Odysseus murder fantasy counter.
Yes.
Because he yet again, thinks about how much he wants to kill these people. And specifically Melanthius. But then a third and final herdsman comes, Philoetius, an overseer, who asks about this new guest. He sees Odysseus and is like, who's this guy? Where is he from? He notices that he has a kingly look and greets him.
Well, yeah, he's the swineherd version of Amphinomus. Amphinomus. Yeah.
I don't know that I.
Or excuse me, he's the goat herdsman, the goat herd version, I guess. He stands in stark contrast to Melanthius, because he's like, oh, this is a stranger, this is a cool guy, this is not a cool guy. I hope the best for him, and stuff like that.
I'm not sure that I would compare him to Amphinomus, though.
Yeah, I guess
there's not really a direct corollary there, just because.
Yeah, you're right.
Amphinomon strikes to contrast in comparison to Antinous, because when it comes down to it, Amphinomus is still one of these suitors who have been pursuing Penelope, and who has been kind of, despite his reservations, turning a blind eye to all the shit that the other suitors pull. So
I don't think he's turning a blind eye.
Well, he's certainly letting it happen.
Well, there's nothing he specifically can do about it, right? He's not a leader, or he doesn't seem to be the leader. Antinous, right?
Yeah,
right?
Antinous.
Yeah. Antinous is sort of the big cheese, but it's like it seems like he's doing his best to give
I don't
them as
know.
good advice as he can.
In a way, yes, but I feel like it's always kind of like coming up with a half-assed objection to what they're doing and then just letting it go.
I think they're fairly he's not really positioned to do anything about it, though.
He's not really
right?
positioned to do anything about it, but he also doesn't have to be there.
He does it. I mean, I guess this goes kind of back to our discussion in book 1 and 2, where, like, on its face, these suitors being there seems to be like the sort of thing you might expect if the king has been gone for 20 years.
Yeah, sure.
And it's also one of those things where it's like, he probably doesn't like the game that's being played, but if he wants to get anywhere, he has to play it at least a little bit. So he like kind of has to be there. Like if he were acting by himself, I don't suspect that someone like him would be sitting in Odysseus's dining hall. But because all these other suitors have made this their front line, he has to either be there or not be there at all.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess there's also the question, like, does he need this? Does he need to marry Penelope? I mean, the answer is probably no, but this would be kind of expected of him. Like, if you want to get into politics, you're going to have to like deal with some shitty people, and you're probably going to have to do things that you never expected to do.
Yeah,
and
that's
you're going to have to sort of
true.
hold your nose to that. It's one of those like trade-offs that is blameworthy, but it's also hard to blame the person in that spot, if you know what I mean. Like, he shouldn't be there.
Sure.
But it's complicated. It's complicated.
Sure.
And I sort of view him as much a victim of the other suitors as, I guess, anyone else in the house. Maybe less so, but in a similar way.
Yeah, sure.
He's
I
a victim
see
in
that.
another sense.
Although, again, I will say I'm not getting the comparison between this and Philogis at all.
That was a snap statement, especially since it just came off the back, like because Amphinomus made like a similar appearance, where it's like in this cacophony of rudeness, he's like, oh, I'm a sensible person. Here's my sensible take on things.
Yeah, I mean, again,
this sort of struck me in
I'm
that same
also
way.
thinking that, like, I'm not sure that I see that the same way.
Yeah,
I see
agree
how
with you.
Penelope sees him differently, but I also don't think that it's nearly as kindly as it comes off.
I never said he was kindly. I just said he was sensible.
Well, okay, that also, though, like, I don't think it's as sensible as it, or as well-meaning as, I don't know, maybe not well-meaning either. But it's just like, I don't think everything is as it seems there necessarily. Like, I think that is what we are given. Yeah, I think that is Penelope's impression of him that we were given, and his words seem a
Odysseus
certain way.
Very much approves of the way he conducts himself as well, right? He
Yeah,
even like
that's
specifically gives him like a very clear like, hey, you better get out of here.
In that, he also warns him that he has to turn to what is right, which I think is saying something about the way he views him. That, like, despite him being perhaps one of the more sensible ones, that he still has an opportunity here to do the right thing, which then implies that he is not doing that, and that he is, using kind of cowardice as a shield. So I think
this is one of those situations where I want to call up the Diomedes sense of cowardice. I wouldn't call him a coward for not like being ready to like turn the tide of the. There are over
for sure, and I
like
don't think neither would I. That's not necessarily what I'm talking about, though. I'm not talking about turning against the suitors. I'm just talking about like the way he speaks up as a kind of way to cover his own ass is how I see it to some degree.
I mean, yeah, he'd want to cover his own ass, but he'd also want to do it in like the best way, right? Or want to do it in a way that would.
In any case, I think
help.
we've gone like way farther on this tangent than we ever needed to.
Yeah, it's true. Well, as we said during the break, this book is pretty straightforward.
It is fairly straightforward.
This book is called The Last Banquet, and it is, as we sort of foreshadowed in the last
banquet.
part, is kind of, like, this is kind of a freaky, or it ends kind of freakily, or nearly ends kind of freakily. I don't know how much further ahead we want to skip to it, or
well,
whatnot.
I would like to go into who Aloysius is, though, because he does become important. So what we get to with him, and why I think he's not alike at all, because is revealed to be one of the slaves who is still loyal to Odysseus. Yes. And basically says, he kind of tells this story about, like, how much he misses Odysseus. And basically, like, he shows his respect to the gods. He invokes the name of the gods. He tells how much he misses Odysseus, and kind of says, like, I've thought about running away, but I've been hoping that my unlucky master will come back. And Odysseus is, like, really good with this. He likes this, and says that, if you're still here when Odysseus comes back home, which is, like, super soon, you can watch as all of these guys who are swaggering through this house get killed. And Aloysius is just like, man, that would be awesome, and I would help too. I would love to kill some of these guys.
Mm-hmm.
And so Odysseus, like, finds himself a new ally, a new loyal person who can help him with this plan.
Yeah, it's him and Eumaeus who
Yeah, it ends up being him, Eumaeus, Telemachus, and Odysseus who carry out this incredible
the slaughter.
Slaughter of human beings. And so they're talking, and while they're doing that, the suitors are still planning how to kill Telemachus. There is yet another bird sign. There's so many bird signs. And Amphinomus takes this to mean that, the plan will fail, the murder will fail, let's think about the banquet, let's think about the festivities. So, they go around and go into the house, spread out, kill all the cows and pigs and goats, and divide all of the offal, the innards, mix wine, people are drinking wine. And very deliberately, Telemachus has Odysseus sit inside the hall and serves him a cup full of wine and some meat. And basically, I think this is kind of like he's putting him in view of the suitors. And also asks the suitors to feed him. Basically, like, I think giving them this, like, one last opportunity to be nice to him, potentially, but Athena is having none of that. And she gets, puts it in their minds to continue abusing him and just making his life hell generally, so that Odysseus will become more and more bitter and ready to kill them.
Yeah, they have their banquet. We know that Penelope is poised to present this challenge to the suitors, and to do it soon. Which Odysseus, in his disguise as old man Odysseus, has encouraged her to do. And then, despite Telemachus's request, his very confident request of the suitors to not harm Odysseus as he eats among them, one person gets very close to doing that.
I had to ask Grad how to pronounce this name. It's Ctesippus, or Ctesippus is what he told me, who ends up throwing an ox foot at Odysseus, which, pisses Telemachus off, but he doesn't actually do anything about it. But he scolds them in such a way that actually does manage to shut all of them up for once. However briefly it actually is.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of those, like, I'm a big boy now moments. You know, he says, I used to be a child, but now I understand things good and bad. I have to watch and put up with all of this. But please back down from your hostility to me, or if you do still want to kill me, go with bronze swords, go on. I want you to. It would be better to die than have to watch you suitors acting so horribly, abusing strangers, dragging the house girls through my home, molesting them. And this shuts them all up. And one of them kind of says, like, okay, this is fair, you know, let's not abuse him, but, like, you gotta get your mom to finally pick someone. It's time. And he says, you know, maybe it is time, but I'm not gonna, or I don't want to force her to do it. And I hope no god makes that happen. And this is when things get weird. Because at this, Athena turns the suitors, it says Athena turned the suitors' minds. They laughed unstoppably, they cackled, and they lost control of their own faces. Plates of meat began to drip with blood. Their eyes were full of tears, and they began to wail in grief. The prophet Theoclymenus addressed them. So, like, all of this happens, and then Theoclymenus, like, asks what the hell, you know, what the hell is happening to you all?
Right, this is very reminiscent of that time when Odysseus' men ate the sun god's cattle.
The cows, like the pieces of cow are like mooing on the skewers.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, it's just like really creepy and weird, and the imagining them all like cracking up and cackling, and then all of a sudden just starting to cry and like wail in grief.
Their plates of meat
plates are dripping in blood. Yeah, it's super creepy.
It's uncertain if this is happening in reality or if this is just what appears to be happening. But either way, it is unsettling. And Theoclymenus reads that, like, I don't know if you saw this. I don't know if you'd need a prophet to tell you that this is some spooky stuff and a bad omen.
Right, like this is basically like hell on earth coming to get you, is I think kind of how I would sum up what he's saying to them. And they just like, they laugh at him and they're like, you know, you're fucking crazy, you know, throw this guy out, make him, you know, go to the marketplace or whatever, you know, and he's just like, you know what? I will leave on my own. Because you're all gonna die.
This almost feels a little bit like, I can never remember the name of the place, but the place that Odysseus went to get the bag of winds, and he comes back.
The fart bag.
The fart bag. And then the king says, this is so clearly a sign that I shouldn't be helping you, that I'm just gonna throw you out right now. Right. And the attitude the prophet has feels that way as well. He's like, in response to being threatened to have dragged out or thrown out, he says, I'll not ask for guides. I have good eyes and ears and feet. My mind is working perfectly, and I am leaving. I sense some evil coming for you all.
He knows. I mean, I think there's, like, the only people who don't have this sense of foreboding are the suitors and the people helping the suitors. Because otherwise it's just like, there's blood coming off the plates. Everyone's cackling and shrieking and wailing, and like nothing good can come of this. And Theoclymenus is just like, yeah, if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck and is bleeding, like I'm getting the fuck out of here. And he does just that. He goes down, leaves the palace, and meets Piraeus, who is Odysseus's trusty man that he had, you know, taken him in as his guest. And at this point, the suitors then try and tease Telemachus about like how unlucky his record is with guests. Like all these, you know, like all these weird old dirty people keep coming to your house, and you know, you should just send them off and sell them into slavery, which is super messed up. And Telemachus just like ignores this and meets eyes with his dad, who obviously he knows is his dad, but nobody else does yet. And Penelope sits there listening to everything that they're saying, you know, as well. And then the book ends, and I'm definitely reading this out because, like, it gave me shivers. I was like, oh my god, this is so creepy. They had killed numerous animals and made their banquet with laughter. But no dinner time could be less welcome than the one the mighty man and goddess would soon bring them in revenge, because they started it and wronged him first.
Yeah. The other thing that I would point out, I guess, as we close out, is that Penelope is out and watching. I don't know if she is specifically watching Telemachus and Odysseus, but I feel like I get the sense that she. So this is a big grammar thing. So it says the
Yeah.
beautiful Penelope had wisely set up her chair to face them, and she listened to what each man was saying. They had killed numerous animals and made their banquet with laughter. Obviously, that last part is in reference to the suitors, but the part where the beautiful Penelope had wisely set up her chair to face them, this is after
Which them?
the sentence. Telemachus ignored the suitors' words and watched his father quietly, still waiting for when they should attack the shameless suitors. I don't know if them is in reference to the suitors, the them that the beautiful Penelope is facing in her chair, if that's referring
Right.
to the suitors or if it's referring to Telemachus and his father.
Although it also sounds like they're fairly well kind of intermixed and could potentially all be visible. So, like, it also could be all of them. But I wonder, like, to what degree that is, like, kind of vaguely worded, intentionally or not.
Yeah.
You know?
It obviously it becomes clearer as it goes on. Like, they had killed numerous animals and made their banquet with laughter. That's obviously referring to the suitors.
Yeah.
That much is unambiguous. But it
the
starts
sentence right
ambiguous.
before is extremely ambiguous.
And this is just another part where, so we know that Penelope doesn't know who Odysseus is yet. I feel like we're pretty confident in saying that she doesn't. But it's another thing
That
to
makes you
suggest
wonder
that,
if she could be looking at him and wondering if it's her husband.
yeah, if she's like, there's something about this guy, like there must be. And I feel like that element just must be there because Penelope, like, I imagine she knows Odysseus pretty well. I mean,
I
she's
also
had a kid with
imagine that this is something that could be, like, in a performance used to really kind of dramatic effect to kind of imply
Yeah.
that. Like, does she know, doesn't she know? And keep kind of the audience on the edge of their seats. So, like, and this is something that I don't think we've come back to quite as much with the Odyssey as we had with the Iliad, and talking about it as, like, a live, performance and an oral tradition. But, like, this is one of those moments where I kind of really remember that, because, like, this is a moment where it could be used to great dramatic effect. And it also is just a moment where, like, the closing of that book, like, imagine telling that to an audience and them being like, oh
Yeah.
my god, what's happening next,
Yeah, for sure. It's a strong ending.
It is a strong ending, and there is doom on the horizon for sure.
Indeed.
But unless you have any other final thoughts, I think that's probably where we will close out this episode.
Nothing really. Except, I mean, I think the question of whether Penelope knows or doesn't know that this is Odysseus is probably not the right question. It's probably more like, does she suspect he might be Odysseus?
Yeah.
Because, like, she can't know for sure, probably, unless she does something like wash his feet or whatever, like Eurycleia.
That's Nanny's job.
Yeah, but I mean, like, the image that I get sort of fading out on this book is Penelope with her eyes on Telemachus, who's watching this stranger intently.
Yeah. I think that's a really kind of interesting way to visually frame it,
Yeah, and that's just sort of, again, it's kind of left up in the air. And I'll be curious as to, well, for one thing, I'll be curious as to what Dr. Daniel has to say.
Definitely.
And I'll also be curious as to what our guest next episode will be saying. Returning guest, Scott
Indeed,
Rubin.
We have our lovely guest Scott Rubin will be coming back to join us once again for books 21 and 22, and I know both of us are very excited about that. But yeah, I think on that note, we'll wrap this up and send it off to Dr. Daniel's tag. As always, listen to it, people. He's awesome. And so we will send you over to him to get his thoughts on this.
Hello everybody, my name is Daniel, otherwise known as Dr. Daniel, Dr. Dan, or the Dancing Grad, and I'm here to offer some thoughts on Llama and Wriste conversation about the Odyssey, books 19 and 20. The action really gets going here in books 19 and 20 of the Odyssey, especially as Odysseus and Penelope meet. However, as Llama and Wriste point out, there are a lot of kind of confusing parts to the story. One such point arrives early on in book 19, when Odysseus tells Telemachus, starting at around line 41, "Hush, no more questions. Discipline your thoughts. This is the way of gods from Mount Olympus." And then these lines that Llama and Wriste pointed out. "You need to go to bed. I will stay here to aggravate the slave girls and your mother, and make her cry, and let her question me." The Greek of those three lines reads as follows. "Alla semen katalexai, ego dupolepsomai autu, ofraketi demomas, kai meterasen erethisdo. He de modu romane e resetai amphisekasta." The two money words here for interpretive purposes are the verb erethisto and the participle odoromene. Emily Wilson uses the word aggravate to render the verb erethisto, and I think this is exactly right. The verb is used multiple times in the Iliad, in Herodotus, in Sophocles, and in other authors to indicate rousing somebody to anger or rousing somebody to fight. I think, though I'm not entirely sure, that the verb erethisto is cognate with the noun eris, which means strife or contention. This idea of aggravating somebody, however, seems to be kind of incongruous for Odysseus with his wife Penelope. Why would he want to provoke her into an agitated state? The Liddell Scott Jones Ancient Greek Dictionary has a sort of a sub-definition of erethisto as, quote, to provoke to curiosity, and it specifically cites this passage in Odyssey 19. However, the violent combative nature of the verb can't really be ignored here. My thought here is that Odysseus wants to provoke or aggravate Penelope out of a state of passivity. Even more so, he wants to engender some bad feelings in Penelope against the suitors who are trying to take her away from her rightful husband, Odysseus. So perhaps by interacting with her and causing her to remember all the good things that she and Odysseus had, he can provoke her into that state. I do think Emily Wilson goes slightly awry, however, when she translates the participle oduromene as, quote-unquote, make her cry. The verb oduromai does indeed mean to lament or bewail. However, there are linguistic features of the participle that make it clear that the act of bewailing or lamenting is on Penelope's part alone, and not Odysseus's. The participle is in what's called the middle voice, wherein the actor of the participle's action performs that action but has some sort of self-interested motive in it. So oduromai basically means to lament because I'm really emotionally invested in something. Moreover, the ending of the participle agrees grammatically with the subject of the sentence, which in this case is Penelope. So Emily Wilson's translation makes Odysseus more agentive than he actually is in the ancient Greek. The Greek basically says, she, in her lamenting, she, in her bewailing, will ask me these things. Perhaps her interaction with Odysseus will provoke those tears, but Emily Wilson gives Odysseus a lot more agency in quote-unquote making Penelope cry than the Greek does. Then there's a fun little linguistic chestnut in the name that Odysseus chooses for himself when recounting his false story of where he came from to Penelope. The name that he gives himself is aithon, which is actually another verbal participle that derives from the verb aitho, which means to burn, to kindle, to set on fire. So there's actually kind of a connection here between this name aithon and the idea contained in erethisto that I just talked about. Fire, provocation, kindling into a fight. The entire situation is basically a powder keg waiting to be lit, and Odysseus is going to be the one sparking the flame. When Penelope commands Eurycleia to tend to the stranger, she calls the stranger Eurycleia's age mate. As Llama and Wriste intuited, the term age-mate is too specific to really be straying too far away from the ancient Greek, and sure enough, in the ancient Greek, the term used here is homelix homelikos, which is a term that basically means of the same age, from the adjective homos, meaning the same, and the noun elikia, which means age. I think this specific appellation works on two different levels. First of all, in ancient Greece, as we might expect, age affords stature and respect. So even though old man Odysseus is a stranger, quote-unquote, calling him a homelix to Eurycleia sets up that expectation of respect. Second, however, I think this works on the level of dramatic irony. The entire point of the relationship between Eurycleia and Odysseus is that she has to be older than him. She's his nurse. She's the one who took care of him when he was young. So, calling Odysseus in disguise a homelix seems to be a dramatically ironic nod to that relationship. Finally, towards the end of Book 22, there was an unclear pronoun referent when the narrator tells us, starting at around line 385, that, quote, Telemachus ignored the suitor's words and watched his father quietly, still waiting for when they should attack the shameless suitors. The beautiful Penelope had wisely set up her chair to face them, and she listened to what each man was saying. The question was whether the them referred to Telemachus and Odysseus or to the suitors, and whether this sort of presaged Penelope knowing something more than she's letting on to. The Greek of the Penelope lines read as follows: Hede katante stin themine parikalea difron, kure kari oio perifron Penelopeia, andron en megarois nekastu muthanakue. The Greek that renders Dr. Wilson's quote-unquote to face them is the Greek prepositional phrase kat antestin. The preposition kata often means down from or down, but the prepositional object here, antestin, appears to be what is called a hapax legomenon, a word that is attested only once in all of Greek literature. Because it's such a rare word, it's kind of difficult to understand what the word means. Even Richard Cunliffe, the one who wrote a lexicon of the Homeric dialect, says under the entry for antestis, this noun, that it is apparently an abstract noun, an abstract substantive derived from the preposition anti, which means opposite from or against. So basically, kat antestin has the sense of being opposite from something, but that something or that someone is not specified in the Greek. If we were to deduce from context clues, however, take a look at the next line. Andron en megarois nekastu muthanakue. Penelope listened to the word of each of the men in the halls. Prior to this narrative section, it was the suitors who were casting jeers at Telemachus and being rowdy in the halls. So that leads me to believe that the them of to face them in Dr. Wilson's translation refers mainly to the suitors, but by extension it could basically refer to anybody who has just been talking or making noise in the hall. I believe there's a red herring in Dr. Wilson's translation that might lead you to believe that Penelope is in cahoots with Odysseus, old man Odysseus, and Telemachus. She says, quote, the beautiful Penelope had wisely set up her chair to face them. Wisely translates the Greek adjective periphron. That adjective has linguistic features that make it clear that it's modifying Penelope, namely the fact that it is feminine in gender, it is singular in number, and it is nominative in case. And the nominative case is the case of a noun or an adjective that you use to indicate the subject of a sentence. In very general terms, there are two broad ways in which you can translate a nominative adjective that's modifying a noun: an attributive fashion or a predicative fashion. An attributive adjective basically just modifies a noun, tells us more about that noun. So when we say periphron Penelopeia, we're basically saying wise Penelope. A predicative interpretation of a nominative adjective, however, puts that adjective basically into the predicate of the sentence after the verb, and basically takes on the qualities of an adverb even though it's technically modifying a noun. And this is the way that Dr. Wilson interpreted that adjective, by saying that she wisely set up the chair. However, I interpret periphron as having more adjectival qualities than adverbial qualities, basically giving Penelope an epithet, wise Penelope, as opposed to saying that Penelope was doing something wisely. It's a very subtle, minor semantic difference, but it can make all the difference in interpretation, especially when we're trying to read between the lines and understand what's going on in these characters' heads. Alright, that's about all I have, so with that, I'm going to toss it back to Llama and Wriste.
Thank you once again, Dr. Daniel, for your time and insight. Always enjoy hearing what you have to say about our discussions, and thank you, dear listener, for tuning in. We hope you'll take the opportunity to read along with us, since there's plenty to love in these stories, and please keep an eye out for our follow-up episodes by following us on Twitter at Homer_bound, or wherever you happen to be listening to us now. We hope to see you in the next episode. See you then.